Oh my god, really? True Review is a massive weeaboo. Get the f*** out right now if you're about to type that in the comment section below, alright? I know for a fact I'm not a weeaboo because I've taken 2 online tests to see if I am, and I've come out as otaku each time. Which I don't think I am. I love my video games, sure. Oh, I guess I'm otaku then. But I'm not afraid to say that there are some animes and visual novels that I also love. Remember that I'm British, you muppets, and being British is a lot like getting caught masturbating. It's something I'm not ashamed of, but then again, I'm not exactly proud of it either. However, I don't love animes or visual novels because they're a part of that genre. I love them because how good some of the stories are, and some show off some of the best writing I've ever seen. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm devoted to just that genre. I've been watching Boardwalk Empire again recently, and I think that show is amazeballs, and that's certainly not Japanese. Look, True Review, that's great and all, but what you're showing us on the screen this very moment seems to suggest otherwise. I know, right? I couldn't have been any more surprised with this one than it started stabbing itself in the chest. Which it does at one point. But before you get any more confused by this video and what you're hearing in contrast to what you're seeing, let me just show you the first thing you see when you load up this game. Okay, so now that that obviously hasn't cleared up a sodding thing, I can get into what this novel is like. Yes, this is a visual novel involving cute anime girls, and yes, it does present itself as a dating sim. However, the real genre of this novel couldn't be any more different. Some of you may have heard about this one already, but I'm guessing that many of you have not, so this is going to be a real pleasure, as well as a challenge to describe. Doki Doki Literature Club gets you playing the role of an unnamed high schooler. You haven't got around to joining a club yet, and your best friend slash childhood friend slash neighbour slash potential love interest has been on your case about it. So much in fact that she pretty much drags you over to her own club to see if you'd like it, in addition to bribing you with cake. Turns out that this is the Literature Club. Reading, whoop-de-f***ing-do. I'm not much of a reader as is. He says while reading a visual novel. Here you meet the rest of the club's members, who are all your standard girly stereotypes. There's your neighbour, who's short on brains but big on heart. There's a small tsundere girl, a nerdy stoic yet friendly girl, and finally, there's your popular perfectionist who's also the club prez. And it is at this point that anyone who's ever played a dating sim will instantly banish any thoughts of literature from their minds as you now consider which girl you're going to try and get off with. The first couple of hours then becomes a dull grind. You're made to listen to these girls talk about different writing styles and tropes, before hitting up a weird mini-game which gets you to write a poem that will determine which out of 3, despite there being 4, girls, you'll end up spending most of your time with, even though none of this will make a lick of difference to the overall story. It quickly becomes quite harmless and light-hearted as you try to settle into the club. However, as the story continues, something strange begins to happen. You notice that one of the girls is beginning to act weird, and after you try to investigate it a bit more, she slowly begins to reveal that she's suffering from emotional problems. It's not long after that the previous happy-go-lucky vibe that this novel was proudly displaying beforehand is replaced with something much darker, and the direction that this novel had started out on is changed dramatically. After a shocking and quite disturbing event occurs, the story reverts back to the beginning, yet noticeable things have changed. For one, the girl I mentioned a second ago no longer exists, and any attempts to reference her will result in glitches appearing on the screen. And as you continue to follow the story again, things only get worse. It is at this point that the game finally shows its hand and cleverly reveals that this is not a casual dating sim at all, but is in fact a psychological horror novel. So if you come here for a light-hearted dating sim, then you've come to the wrong place. Now, I've never really known any good horror novels in this field before, if I'm honest, as I'm not sure exactly how you'd be able to pull it off. Horror movies nowadays aren't really that effective, and a horror book is only as good as your imagination. But because you aren't seeing it, it'd never be as terrifying as if you were to place yourself in the story itself. That's why I love horror games, as the immersion is a lot easier in those than in books and movies, because you have to react to the scares yourself. In a book or a movie, you know that the main character is going to react to it themselves and get themselves out of it, but that's not the same in a horror game, as you're the one who needs to deal with it. So before coming to this novel, I always had it in mind that a horror title wouldn't work that well, as the only thing you can do in those is to choose which reply to give. Well, after playing this novel, I stand corrected. I have played Silent Hill 2 and I didn't have much difficulty with it. I have played all that Frictional Games has to offer and I managed to get by. I have gone all the way through Outlast 1 with only minor amounts of poop being found in my pants by the end. Yet Doki Doki Literature Club was a game that unsettled me. I ended up loving this game so much that I found that I was in two minds. A, I loved it so much that I wanted to see how it'd try and disturb me next, while B, I loved it so much that I wanted a break to calm down and maybe play something else so I can strengthen my nerves for round 2. By the time you reach the second story arc, you know that something is very wrong with the world you're living in. The scenery keeps changing, the music begins to play in reverse, each character begins to show a much sinister and darker side to them, several shocking events will occur before the game tries to take it back and pretend that nothing had taken place, and in one case, my PC crashed. Though that just turned out to be my power supply eating shit and dying. And yes, I had a wonderful 2 days waiting for the replacement to come and spent most of it watching TV and scratching my ass. Thanks for asking. Not for 2 whole days though, I'd have no ass left if that was the case. In one case, I was asked by one of the girls if I'd like to read a book with her. She begins preparing some tea but realises that the kettle needs water. So she goes out into the hall to get some. The story then cuts to 10 minutes later where she still hasn't returned. So you go out into the hall to look for her, only to then find that she suddenly appeared again, only this time, several deep cuts have appeared all over her arm. However, before this image can sink into your mind, the game behaves like you were never meant to see this. The text suddenly shoots into reverse and you're taken back in time to 10 minutes ago, where the girl has suddenly returned with a full kettle. The plot then progresses from there under the impression that nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But I tried to be clever and wanted to call it for what it was, so I went into the game's log history to reread what had happened. Turns out I wasn't clever enough, for the game had also wiped the entire scene from the log. You can tell that this was made by a gamer, because I swear that everything you could think of that might try to catch the game out will not work as it has already been thought about by the devs. And you'd be surprised at how often this sort of thing happens. There's even a moment that breaks the fourth wall so much that in order to keep playing, you need to quit the game, go into the game's directory and delete a file. I'm not joking, you actually have to do that in order to progress the game and it's completely intended as well. Not only that, but by the time you reach the end credits, the game itself has become so corrupted that the only way to start from fresh is to uninstall it and then reinstall it. But as said a little while ago, this game isn't just about being all gross and horrific. It's also very cleverly designed. The first time you meet the club members, I mentioned that the conversation gets dull quickly as they all talk about different writing styles, etc. However, what's both fascinating and concerning is that by the time you witness the scene the second time round, though the conversation has barely changed, the true meaning behind what they're saying begins to dawn on you, as it turns out that the types of writing styles that they are discussing can easily be applied to how the novel is presenting itself as well. Some of the scares are quite obvious in this game, but some of them require the reader to work for them, and I found that the atmosphere becomes much more enjoyable when you stumble across something disturbing that you could have easily missed. This game also gets into the habit of recommending that you save your progress when presented with a choice, before deleting all of your save files after making what you think is the wrong choice. I counted 2 times when I was asked to make a serious choice that could lead to something bad, so I'd save it beforehand just in case things went tits up. But even when things did go tits up as a result, I found that the save file that I made not even a minute ago was either no longer there, or even if it was, after loading it back up, I was being loaded into where I was already, meaning that here, there are no second chances. Once something has happened in this novel, it's happened for good. You can't go back and choose the other option, meaning that, much with life itself, the only thing you can do is to go forward. However, despite this being one of the best novels I've read this year, there are a couple of things I want to mention as constructive criticism. Firstly, this novel is quite short. I think I finished it in about 5 hours over 2 sessions, and I was a little bit gutted about that because I felt that there was enough room to have added in more. I really loved what I read and was eagerly awaiting the next chance I could play it again, and I guess I was a bit bummed out when I finished it on my second session. This novel isn't supposed to be a big blockbuster of a title, but it was so engaging that I felt a bit disappointed that it ended so quickly. Also, most of the characters aren't worth your time. One of them gets removed from the story before you have a chance to get to know her. The Tsundere girl is what you'd expect. I made some cupcakes. Not that I made them for you or anything, jeez. Also, I never got how she's supposed to be suffering from parental abuse, in that her dad pretty much starves her, yet she spends a lot of time at home baking cakes and sweets. So, you're not allowed to eat meals, but you have access to enough food to bake for your friends. Then surely that problem has been resolved. Have I tripped over a plot hole? Methinks I have! The quiet book girl thinks the best way to socialise is by doing the most unsociable thing possible, by silently reading a book together. You do realise that quiet reading doesn't support co-op or multiplayer modes, right? And finally, Monica is a psychotic bitch. But though the game makes you interact with them, they're not really the focus here, and might as well be cardboard cutouts. So in a way, they're important to the game, sure, but their personalities and who they are aren't important. Which is weird. Another point I have, though it's a really minor one, so don't worry, but the character's sprite transition could have been faded out over a second or two, instead of having one of the girls taking a pose 1 second, to then suddenly taking another pose just like that in an instant the next second. Unless that's what the dev was going for, in which case, okay I guess, but it just looks better with a gradual fade to make it look like the character is physically moving into that pose rather than teleporting into it. And finally, my last criticism has to do with the last third of the game. The first third is all about hanging out with girls, discussing literature, and writing poetry. The second third is a deranged and horrific experience, and I loved every second of it. Yeah, the second third of the game is easily the best part. But then the last third changes once again, and while I still thought that it was incredibly clever, what the writer had done, I was a little bit disappointed that the horror element had been totally removed. By this point, all of the cards are on the table, and the true nature of the game has revealed itself. But while this is all fine and dandy, it did mean that there was no longer any need for the horror to be there. Instead, the last third purely focused on breaking the fourth wall and forcing the player to try to outwit the game itself. In fact, Doki Doki hates the fourth wall with a passion. If Metal Gear Solid kicked it in the crutch a few times, then by comparison, Doki Doki smashed the fourth wall's head in with a bar stool. And don't get me wrong, I thought what the writer did was excellent, in having the protagonist be you, the reader, and the antagonist be the novel itself, rather than any of the characters, but I just felt this game was at its best when trying to freak us out with confusing and disturbing scenes, rather than going all Evangelion on us and having the fabrics of reality come crashing down by stripping the wallpaper off. But with all that said, please bear in mind that what I've shown you in this video is just the tip of the iceberg, as there are many moments here where you feel as if someone, or something, is working behind the scenes to confuse you. In fact, it almost feels like a virus has infected the game, and is now making strange and disturbing things happen. Now, I don't want to give too much away here, and I'm only showing you a little bit of what could be seen as the lesser end of the disturbing spectrum, but it must be said that most of what you encounter is far worse than what I've shown you. Also, that warning at the start of the game rings true. If you're disturbed easily, or hell, if you're under the age of 15, then it's probably best to avoid this one. However, if you think you can handle it, then go get it on Steam for the amazing price of 100% off, because it's totally free to get. In conclusion, I think you can tell that I like this one. It's a massive recommendation from me, and with it being completely free to get, then unless you're easily shocked, then there's no reason why you shouldn't try this one out. It's like the Pony Island of visual novels, and that's another game you need to play if you haven't already. It starts out very innocently before taking a very dark and horrific turn for the better, and once you know what's really happening, then you'll never be able to look at any of the characters in the same way again. In a sense, this game kind of borders on creepypasta territory, with its use of murder, self-harming, and supernatural occurrences, but ultimately, this novel is simply a tool to shock the player whilst making a point about visual novels in general. You could literally spend days picking this one apart, and you'll learn something new each time, and there are tons of secrets and Easter eggs to find here as well. Once the horror festival came to town, I couldn't put this novel down. True of you, stop rhyming. It's not for everyone, sure, but then again, neither is punching a Nazi. You may feel bad about taking part, but you'll feel glad that you did by the end of it.